Hello, my name is Jason T. Ingram. I am a conversion therapy survivor, and including an actual straight camp. Long story. I am currently been mentally disabled for almost a decade and living on support. I'm known around my community as doing a lot of weird, crazy music and art and lots of comedy. The right wing has been afraid of communism for a long time, and I'll get to that in a little bit. First off, I apologize for this video being so long. I have a lot to say, and I really don't have any authority on these issues, but the fact that I have grown up in pretty much the extreme left and what I call the Unchurched Belt, which is from San Francisco to Seattle. Portland is almost the buckle of that. So I was exposed to a lot of very radical leftist ideas, and then I became a born-again Christian throughout my 20s, and I adopted that ideology, the politics, and of course the theology. I hear a lot of people joking about Donald Trump. In fact, I was so offended at all the jokes going on summer of 2016 that I was using social media to warn people that Donald Trump was going to be our next president. In fact, I made a public prediction in March of 2016, even before the primaries, that he was going to win. I had a lot of reasons why. The main reason, and I see this connection going on so much, and I don't hear a lot about this connection, although there are people that are talking about it. It has to do with Bible-based born-again Christianity. That world, those values, that whole ideology is so connected to Trump's world that he is creating in our nation and using the office of the presidency in order to accomplish a lot of things. So I see also a lot of alarmists, and I don't want to be an alarmist. I want to bring hope, and I want to encourage people, especially those that are sharing a lot of the views that I do, or what we would also consider progressives or the left wing. At the same time, I tend to view myself as very conservative compared to the community that I hang around in, Portland art and music and all of our wonderful weirdness here. And so I've also wondered, and like I said, I hate to be an alarmist, but I really started thinking about this about a year ago because we were really getting more divided, and it was really showing, especially that the left wing has had a lot of victories in the last decade or two, especially when it comes to people like me that are gay and having the freedom to marry and basically have the same rights as a lot of other people do. So, are we heading towards a civil war? I don't know if it's ever going to get seriously violent. I do know that when there's tension and when there's people that are doing stuff like this, it typically ends in a lot of killing, because that is sort of the ultimate destination of when you have too much power going to one place, and when there's a lot of fear, when there's a lot of rhetoric like this. So what we're seeing over the last 12 months in our community has been absolutely heartbreaking. We are seeing 50 years of civil rights unravel right before us. We are seeing things like, even here in Oregon a year ago, we had some extreme right-wing people occupy federal land with firearms, and they pretty much, as far as I could tell, they got away with it. And they served very little jail time, and they were not treated the same as if it were a different ideology type people that were there doing that kind of stuff, or a different race for that matter. So it's really making me wonder why these people could get away with so much when we had a Democrat in the White House. And we also saw that there were more and more Republicans that were in government and things like that. So now I'm finally a president that is, and it's very interesting, not necessarily the good guy thing, which is what a lot of times the Republican Party was trying to portray themselves when I was growing up in hardcore liberal Portland in the 80s. I grew up on wheatgrass and soy milk and new age synthesizer music. That was my world. We were afraid that this whole moral majority type thing was going to threaten our rights. And in a lot of ways, we won. Being on the extreme right wing from the mid-90s all the way to 2006 was fascinating to then see the left wing from that perspective, having been on the inside of the other side. When Obama got elected, it was fascinating to be living in a swing county in the swing state of Ohio. And I was campaigning for Obama. And the kind of things people were talking about in a conservative rural community was fascinating. The fear that Obama was a Islamic terrorist and had ties to that, and had some anti-America type religion that he was involved in, that he was actually a foreigner born outside of the United States. And they went so far to say that Barack Obama was the Antichrist. Well, he only has less than 24 hours to prove that he's not the Antichrist. And he didn't take away their guns. I think one of the funniest things is that if you follow memes on social media pages like Right Wing News, they have these very alarmist type images of Barack Obama taking away people's guns, either literally or in a legislative type sense. Well, that never happened either. So why is the left wing freaking out now the same way, saying that Trump is a modern day Hitler and things like that? And then on the right wing, they were saying that Obama was going to be the modern day Hitler. It's really funny listening to both sides and both extremes, and they both want to point to these guys are blah, 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 blah. And then they're saying the same insults, basically, but it's from a whole different way of thinking. And if I could sum it up, the progressives want new ideas, and the traditionalists think that old ideas work better. Donald Trump grew up in a society that worked for him. He wants to try to not only sort of create the environment and the ways of thinking and the values that were going on in the 1940s and 50s, he wants to take us back to the days of empires. Now, I got to think about this about 2 or 3 years ago, and I started wondering why we don't see these empires taking over massive amounts of territory, like the Soviet Union just keeps getting smaller and smaller. The whole Yugoslavian thing kept getting smaller and then fell apart. So I grew up in an era that saw basically the fall of communism. What I see now is what I call corporate empires. The United States is, in some respects, an empire because we have our fingers in so many different countries, and we can overpower those countries by paying people very little. And when we go into countries where they don't really have a lot of jobs, we're giving them jobs, but basically we are making slaves. Whip, whip. And all this cheap stuff made overseas is just an example in the outsourcing and things like that. And I think it's the same kind of spirit, so to speak, that we saw back in ancient Egypt. There's people from a different ethnic group that weren't very empowered. For instance, the children of Abraham. They came to ancient Egypt for help, then they were enslaved. So I'm seeing this same kind of spirit sort of happening, and it's never really died, it just takes a different form. Communism appealed to young progressives a century ago. Now what we see is this sort of empire spirit is targeting conservatives, young conservatives, especially old conservatives, and born-again Bible-believing Christians, which is a pretty large population. not large enough to have the influence and the power that they have, and the influence over government is massive compared to the small population that they really are. However, I believe that born-again, Bible-believing Christians was one of the things that tipped the election to get Trump to vote. Whether the Russians were involved in hacking, I don't know. I try not to think of this sensational, but 2016 was really fucking sensational. It played out like a comedy movie that was a satire about the American government and the weaknesses that we have. And I still hang around a lot of progressives, and I still see some folks that are still in a form of denial. Some folks have different ways of coping with it. I do see a lot of people that are using a lot of old methods, and I might get to that as well. Here's where I get kind of spooky spiritual. Now, I don't want to mention anything about space aliens and Illuminati, so I'm sorry for all of you guys that watch YouTube all night until 6 in the morning, just like totally zoned into this Illuminati and all these space aliens are influencing the government, and it gets people into this crazy fearful hysteria. I don't want to cause that. I don't really believe in much of that stuff at all. From a purely scientific standpoint, and this might get a little bit into metaphysics, but let's just say that human beings have become self-aware for thousands of years. They're trying to cope with things like they know they're going to die. How do they preserve themselves? I mean, this is going way back into the very things, the very ultimate fears that the human race has had for eons, basically. So maybe what happened, and I don't know the science or the metaphysical science behind this, but if you think about thousands and thousands of people in ancient times, and they're all thinking about these horrible fears. If I die, I'm gone. What's the point of working towards anything if it's just going to be gone? And I think those thought forms can build up until they start ruling other people. Now, it also could be the fact that brains are very easily programmed, and there is a direct link to plug into somebody's brain. You know, like in the Matrix when they got an interface in the back of their head and they plug in this thing and suddenly their mind is totally controlled with an alternate reality. That happens. It happens. It doesn't happen through wires. It happens through words, and it happens through triggering people's fears. So that's one of the reasons why I don't want to give this crazy, fearful message and having people run around and being street preachers and holding signs saying it's the end of the world. We don't need that kind of bullshit. But what I do think is that there is an unseen power at work here. Obviously, because we've got this tyrant who is getting away with more things than any politician or businessman has gotten away with, as far as I can tell. And that's one of the reasons why I thought Donald Trump was going to be elected. I was thinking about it a year ago, and I thought, boy, this guy's really getting away with anything. And he could say anything, no matter how crazy or false it is, and people are making fun of him, and they're laughing at him, and yet I started looking online, and I'm like, oh my God, people are believing him. I was working towards the Democrats and trying to do a little bit of campaigning, but at the same time I thought, you know what, it's useless because we're going to lose. And that's one of the things that we're doing, is that we are grieving those of us who are in the progressive type communities or the left wing or whatever. And I hate to say this, but I think things are going to get a lot worse. And a lot of people are saying that too. I do have some hope, so stay tuned if this is depressing you way too much. So, are they ghosts? Are they spirits? Are they people that are trying to beat immortality? Or beat death, rather. Being immortal seems to be one of the supervillain characteristics When you see superhero movies, the villain is often somebody who wants to live forever on Earth, or who wants to know for sure that they are not going to die, that whatever power they had, they're afraid to lose it. And it's absolutely terrifying for somebody who has spent their whole lifetime, and a lot of times we're dealing with a legacy too, like the Ming dynasty or the whatever dynasty in whatever country, king somebody, the first, the second, and then their son, and then their son. I mean, so we're also dealing with this legacy thing too. Now, what happens is that when somebody has their mind programmed and somebody's giving them a lot of fear, you're going to die, you're going to lose everything, you're going to lose your power. If they get around that enough, they start forming they form these neural pathways, for lack of a better term. Well, those neural pathways cause them to think in a certain way, which I call an ideology. And what happens with that is they pass that along to their children or anybody that is under their power, and they start believing that too. So basically, from a strictly atheist perspective, I can say that this type of ideology is being passed down for thousands and thousands of years through emperors, and every time the free world rises up and says, hey, we are tired of being overpowered, we are tired of this tyranny, we need freedom of speech and freedom of all these different things, and then that's where a lot of the progressive type people start emerging and then start creating what we try to do in America we call the free world. Now, the free world has never been any more threatened in my lifetime before. And it is scary. And I did have my time of denial and my time of grieving and a lot of this stuff. But for me, it's been really surreal because I did a lot of my grieving through most of 2016. So when he got elected, it was like, well, I was right. Fuck. That's one thing I don't want to be right about. And the fear of death, having this obsession with attachment to the things of earth, and the fear of letting go of power is part of an old method. And it also has to do with entitlement, and that's where a lot of the white supremacy stuff is coming up too, because it's the same type of similar ideology that's in there. Now, the born-again Bible-believing Christians, it's kind of a tongue twister, in my experience, are not racists. Very few of them said racist things. Now, a lot of the racist and the Aryan nations, a lot of them claim to be Christians. That's a separate group from this. And the reason why I'm mentioning them is because they are feeling like they can rise up and be more public. And I think that's going to happen more, because these people have been in hiding for a long time. They haven't gone away. And in fact, the more we try to silence the bigots and those kind of people and that sort of ideology, it just fuels that even more, and they feel like they want to start saying, well, we need some equal rights, and we need freedom of speech, we need freedom of being an asshole. And so it's interesting, having been extremely on both sides, wholeheartedly on the left and the right, I listen to people on the right from a left perspective and listen to people on the left from my conservative perspective, and I don't see a lot of differences in the general attitudes. I grew up with an incredible aversion towards Bible-believing born-again Christians. I was raised around this, I hate to say it though, but I was raised around a lot of prejudice against born-again Bible-believing Christians, because we assumed that they were all bigots and da-da-da-da-da and all this kind of stuff. So when I got around those kind of people, I found them to be very warm and refreshing and very upfront and honest, and they didn't play so many head games like the artsy-fartsy people I grew up with. So culturally, I'm kind of white trash. I have friends that live in trailers, and I love these kind of people. I like people that are kind of lower class. I even like people that are firearms collectors. And yet my views are way more on the left, being openly gay and open about being disabled and a lot of things like that. So, this is where it gets really, really tough, is because I share the same views as folks on the political left or progressives. And I don't want to wage war. I don't want to fight. I don't want to try to take a group of people and say, these are my enemies. That's the last thing I want to do. That is not what a lot of folks on the left wing want to do. However, for instance, the guy that runs the meditation community that I go to, he said he went to a Bernie rally and there was so much hatred and aversion towards the right. And it was sad to him because he saw the same kind of attitudes and the same kinds of methods that were going on. And I see that so much in my community. The problem is, and there's a couple of them, it's a lot actually, is that when somebody has waged war on you, you're in a fight. So I am in this involuntarily waged war against everything that I love. Most of the things that I love in my life. The freedom to tell people in public places that I'm gay and not be put in prison or shot. Pretty amazing. The problem is that now I'm in a position where I'm probably going to have to fight to keep those rights because they're threatened. Now, I don't want to go off into all these little issues because right now the left wing seems to be having this sort of general attitude that, well, we won. And then, oh no, we're being threatened. So this complacency is now turned into this fear and this sort of berserk energy. And we also have a lot of old methods that we used in the civil rights movement, which are still good. I'm all about peaceful, nonviolent demonstrations. I don't know how effective it is. Now we have so many people infiltrating these public demonstrations that I'm even questioning whether I want to be with a group that could be so easily vulnerable and easily manipulated and infiltrated by people who have their own opportunistic whatever it is they want to do. This is an opportunity for them to be total assholes and to destroy property and things like that. That's one of my dilemmas. So one of the kind of unfortunate hopelessness things that I feel right now is the fact that nonviolent methods are going to have to change. And I think we need a lot of creativity in order to do that. And there are some people out there that have some great ideas, and I'm not one of those people. I don't know what to do at this point. So basically, I'm faced with a huge group of people, including my dear country that I love so much, and my own government, are waging war against a lot of things that I hold dear. And what do I do in self-defense in order to protect myself and those that I love? That's going to be hard. Another thing that the left wing does is we have a tendency, and I do this too, because I'm doing it right now. I'm attacking my own people. And I'm attacking the right wing. The right wing has a tendency to attack each other. I noticed that when I was a born-again Christian, this was us and them. And then there was also this, well, these guys call themselves born-again Christians, but they're not, because they drink beer or something crazy like that. So we're going to criticize them. That happens not as much, because one of the things that the far right does, especially the religious right, is when I was involved in that, we had this great discipline of not speaking bad about our leaders, especially our candidates. I voted for George W. Bush twice. I can't think of one negative thing I heard from my community, and my community was this extremely tight-knit. And even back then, 20 years ago, before there was all this social media, we still had our own sources. We were glued to those sources. We believed them. We didn't challenge authority, and we were highly organized, and we had a militant structure. So that's one of the reasons why this small population has a lot more power, considering how small of a group they are. So it doesn't look like a fair fight. And one of the other things, too, is that they have what I call a bypass button. Their morality about, not lying or cheating or stealing and all that kind of stuff, or abusing or hurting people or taking advantage or overpowering people, Christians don't do those things unless the God button comes in. So basically, I'm going to obey authority, I'm going to be kind and loving and generous and all these things, but if God tells me to do such and such, then I'm going to bypass all of my conscience, my guilt, and my compassion, and I can do whatever the fuck I want as long as I bring God into the picture. As long as I think God says it in the Bible, and I take these scriptures and I turn them into something that is going to suit my cause or whatever it is. And the cause is fueled with fear a lot of times. So we've got a couple things. Somebody is terrified that they're going to lose what they've been working on for a long time. And then suddenly they are faced with a decision to do something wrong and harmful and destructive, including the killing of innocent life. Once you bring God into the picture, you can do absolutely anything. And when your brain is programmed that way, when you're thinking along those lines, you're capable of doing absolutely anything. So, it's interesting where I live in what I call the buckle of the Unchurched Belt. If you go from San Francisco to Seattle, we have an alarming rate of unchurched people, people that don't go to church, people that consider themselves no religion or atheist or agnostic. So in 2009, based on Wikipedia, Oregon ranked highest. Portland, where I live in the Portland area, is really, really funny. I have never seen a place in this nation where there's so many strip clubs, so many liquor licenses, and so few churches. Now, I went to Bible school. In fact, here's my old Bible from Bible school. It's my Thompson Chain Reference Bible with tabs that I added. They always called Tulsa the buckle of the Bible Belt. And one of the things that I hear is this trying to demonize the other side and taking sides. And that's freaking me out, because I like conservatives. I love born-again Christians. I love rural Americans. I absolutely love these people. I find them to be very genuine and upfront and honest. And I mean, they're just awesome, awesome, passionate people. And yet I see a lot of folks in my community trying to demonize them, as a lot of the right wing is trying to demonize the left. So it's really freaking me out that we want a theocracy. We want a king that has ultimate power, but this king hears from God. So basically what we have the God button. And the God button says there's a right and wrong. There's the way we should treat everybody. We should follow the words of Jesus. Suddenly, when we're faced with a moral dilemma and we need to do something to fight, to protect our family values or whatever it is, once God comes into the picture, then we're capable of doing anything. Now, that because Donald Trump is really, really catering, and he still is, even though he's losing his approval rating, he is targeting the type of people that I used to hang out with. Born-again, Bible-believing Christians, rural Americans, even the secular type rural Americans too. Because a lot of them still have a lot of respect for the Bible and things like that, whether they believe it or not. Because Bible culture is ingrained in a lot of American culture. So what is the history of these kinds of people? If we go back in time, we see the Puritans, and they were kicked out of Europe because they were kind of like policing people with their high-minded sort of Puritan ideas. Just because we abstain from this, we're better. I said, well, you need to go over to the New World. So they go over to America, and they were kind of bullying for a while. And for the most part, I think they were very good and very courageous people. At the same time, I think they're very similar to, there's a lot of countries in the world that have something that I'm calling the Islamic police, that actually walk around, and if they see somebody that's doing something against the Quran, then they have the God button. Hey, I'm right, this person's wrong, therefore I have the ability to do anything in order to overpower them because I have God, they don't have God. That's what I call the God button. And it's kind of similar to emperor worship. The Pharaoh, this is God on earth. This is somebody who hears divinely, almost like the Pope, too. The Pope is the authority of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church is sort of an empire. It rules, it has a lot of influence over a lot of governments. It's very similar. Now, Donald Trump is not really the problem. I think a lot of us seem to point to that, but there's so many people, and there's been so much going on for a long time that has been trying and trying to get this type of administration to be in power. So I think that Donald Trump is a grotesque symptom of a lot of issues that have been stirring in the hearts of a lot of people, stirring in their minds for generations, and now we finally get in power and we can do what we want, sort of a thing. It's going to be interesting. I think after Inauguration Day, I think there's going to be another shift in our country like Election Day was. He's going to announce things that he said he was going to do. He's going to do some of the things he said he's going to do. He's going to not do some of the things he said he's going to do. He's going to do some of the things he didn't say he was going to do. But it's going to shock people as much as what he did in 2016. Now, I'm thinking about specifics, and I don't want to predict any specifics that he might do. But I thought it would be funny if Donald Trump is going to start asking for things like, I think we need to bring back the old ways, and he's going to install a golden throne somewhere in the White House or the Capitol. That's not going to happen, but something similar to that, something similar that's going to put him in this place that no U.S. president has ever been in before, and that's going to be in a place where he is going to be not necessarily worshipped, but it's going to be very similar to empire, to the emperor worship. And it's going to have that same spirit that has been trying to rule this world for a long time. What's fascinating is we have a businessman, because Republicans have done a really good job at deregulating businesses, or laws that can allow them to do a lot of harm. So it's fascinating that we had a businessman, and it was one of those things that I just watched this thing from my little teeny perspective I have as being just a loser living alone and, living on support, and just watching this thing unravel year after year. And all governments are vulnerable to this. We have a great system of government. It's incredibly flawed, yet I think for the most part it worked. And now that it's starting to unravel, things are going to get really interesting, and we're going to resemble a lot of other countries. Now, a theocracy, like was in that Frank Zappa video, is basically defined as a king, like a monarchy, but somebody who apparently hears from God, or who has this authority that is above every other ideology in the entire world. Now, there are different types of religions in this world, but there are three main monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And when you take each one of those types of religions to an extreme, you're ending up in this thing that says, my God's the only God, the only real one, and everybody else, they're false. That sort of ideas can actually get into government, and there are a lot of governments that are like that. So in some ways, I'm kind of not surprised, because our country has faced a lot of heartache. And when people are desperate and they're hungry and they're tired and they're working 2 or 3 jobs and they're traumatizing each other, they're going to try to want this sort of savior. Now, this savior is Donald Trump. And he has found a way to directly influence anybody who wants to hear from him. And it's through a little blue bird called Twitter. Who would have guessed that that would be one of his biggest tools that he could use in order to, and it is, I hate to say it, but it is brainwashing. I mean, any guy who posts 5 to 6 times a day trying to market towards a particular group of Americans, it's pretty obvious what he's doing. A lot of people know it, a lot of people don't know it. But I urge you to look at Donald Trump's Twitter feed and find out the kind of stuff that people are being told. Another thing that I'm asking people, especially the progressives, is to not turn off your TV. Turn on the mainstream news and find out what people are being fed. Everybody that I know that were absolutely shocked on election day were the same people that weren't watching television, that were not watching mainstream television because they were afraid that they're going to get brainwashed and all this kind of stuff or whatever. It's very similar to the folks on the extreme right. They think that the media is liberal and is brainwashing them and all this kind of stuff. I see the American media as actually being pretty moderate, having been on the extreme left and the extreme right. I think from the last 10 to 20 years that the media has gotten incredibly liberal. And I think one of the main things that I see as far as the media turning more liberal, and I'm not talking about Fox News and even CNN, is the acceptance of LGBTQ people like me. And it's wonderful. Yay, we have our way. Yay, we're safe and we're free. And then that's threatened. So it's going to be interesting. That's one of the reasons why Mr. Trump is talking so much about mainstream media, is because he is doing the very old-fashioned technique, is divide and conquer. And if he could plug right into people's minds and download his thoughts constantly, sometimes like over a dozen times a day, he will tweet something. Tweet. And it's absolutely fascinating. And it's working. Now, we have our sit-ins and we have holding hands and songs and shouting and doing what we did in the civil rights movement. I think that people should keep doing that. I don't know if it's going to work, though. I don't know if that's going to be what's going to work today. But I think that people still should. I still have a dilemma about it as well. So, as far as like what do we do at this point, I really don't have those answers. I just feel that things are going to get worse, but I also have some hope. And I think one of the hopeful things is the fact that, yes, even under Obama, our government was becoming hostile towards the free world. And there was so much other influences from corporations and from people on the religious right that were really influencing politics. So it's not just Trump. There's a lot of people involved. He just happens to be the one that is kind of like seen as the badass, the rebel, the guy that's coming in and fighting and taking over and breaking the rules and all that kind of stuff, which is interesting, which is what the 2 elections before that, the Republicans changed their image, and it was fascinating. They were getting on Saturday Night Live, and they were now like, yeah, we're the bad boys. It's very weird. Sarah Palin going rogue. Like, that's not the conservatives that I grew up around. we were the rogue people. We were the counterculture. We were the ones that were underground. And now the conservatives are the underground ones that are getting in power now. So there's such a shift, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I think what it's going to do is it's going to motivate all the people that are threatened, and every good thing that I love in my life and I hold dear is threatened, and it's going to motivate me to get new ideas. I think there's going to be a lot of innovation. I think there's going to be more passion. And I think there's going to be some really, really amazing freedom of expression. Because whenever there is an oppressed people group, that's where we see a lot of creativity. So I'm urging artists to get out there and just be bold and absolutely like in your face when it comes to what we believe and what we stand for. And we're doing it. I think it's awesome.